All right, folks, welcome back. This is Basic Design Day 13. We start a new project today. All of this back and forth is because of different holidays and break days that the school works in. And so I introduced the fourth project, and it's a patterns-based project. So they are continuing their 5 modes. We're finishing that up. The final critique will be next week, as well as the first critique of this new project. And because whatever, the scheduling doesn't matter. There's always this flexibility back and forth between the courses. But what is the point of this project? If we think back, what we've done so far with the first project, think about how the human eye moves. How do you attract the attention of the human eye? How do you keep it? How do you get people to be interested in a composition is the second project. There's a lot of stuff that it does, but the number one thing it does is think about balance and how do you entice a person to continue to engage with, and balance is a really good way to do that. It's obviously not the only way to do that, as we've talked about. The third project, then, the 5 modes, is thinking about focal points and how do we get focal points to attract our attention. If we remember, Ansel Adams Teton Snake River, the Ansel Adams Snake River photo that I will load up in one moment. And let me share my screen. If we think about this image and what it contains, we talked about the movement of the eye, the focal points of the mountain, the focal point of the river, the balance of the overall composition. The one thing we haven't addressed yet is the kind of, I'm going to call it background elements. Now, I don't mean background by the thing furthest away from us. The furthest away, like physically in space, the photons that came from the furthest away are somewhere in way back here, which you could argue this area over here is background, but the clouds, like, they are technically in the background, but that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the aspects that recede within our attention, the way that we view the image, and we don't really need to look at them. I've looked at this image thousands of times, and even still, I don't really spend time exploring over here, or like way in this gray darkness, and especially this area, these grassy hills right here. Those would be elements that are working in the background of my perception. That's what this project is about, because compositions aren't just moving the eye, aren't just balancing, aren't just making focal points. They're using these other things that support the thrust of whatever the image is in the background. Oftentimes, in our very flat culture here in the West right now, that means just a solid color. But you will see traditionally throughout all of human history, people make patterns. Patterns are extremely good at doing what backgrounds do. What do backgrounds do? I like to think of it like, one of the things I point out is that when we talk about patterns today, we generally talk about the decorative arts. The etymology of the term decorative is really interesting because what it basically means is to prepare a place. So you would decorate a place so that something could occur there. And now you think about like wedding venues, like the decorators come in, or you think about like homemaking or interior decorators or interior designers. They're preparing a place for living, for having a wedding, for doing these things. The notion of what these things do is they set it up so that the thing that is supposed to happen here, the thing that's supposed to be paid attention to, is front and center, or is enabled, so to speak. They're service-oriented things. So if we took this image, like I think I did in the video series, I might not have. I do it in class sometimes if I've got time. If I cut out all of those background image aspects with the lasso tool, and I just keep the river and just the mountains and just the clouds, it doesn't feel the same. It doesn't feel like a whole landscape. Those things that you just kind of see in your periphery or in the background of your attention do so much to create atmosphere. They create the feel so that when you see the mountain, you think, is this a landscape? What's the scale of that mountain? All of those things are happening very quickly in your subconscious, so to speak, so that you don't have to sit there and think about it. It gives them a setting in place. It's like that first mode of visual processing, where the locating in space is looking for that context, and background constantly does that. And the way human beings have used patterns reaffirms this. So it's textiles, it's wallpapers, it's largely decorative things in order to make vast swaths of areas of walls, of garments, of floors and carpets, in order to tie them into a cohesive environment and to create, to decorate, to prepare a place for something else to happen.
That rug really tied the room together, did it not?
The same as, even today with, political candidates and the backgrounds behind them, or news anchors and their little like animated backgrounds. They're trying to get something that is relatively ubiquitous, but communicates, we're here to be trusted. We've got our like American flag or something. I always think of the Colbert Report and their brilliant satire on those kinds of graphics. But those sorts of things that are like propping up, they're serving as patterns, as backgrounds in order to create a full association happening in your subconscious. So the part that you don't really have to look at, people design those. And that's a key part of composition making. And that's what today is all about. So we do that. And then let me switch back here. We talk about those things, and then we dive into exercises, and I have them take their 5 modes. Again, they are using the insect drawings that they've made of a variety of them, and we chop them up into different swatches, and we draw them by hand. I like to tie it into that really human activity. First of all, almost every student likes doing this. This is one of those things that even if you can't draw, tracing paper and a grid and repeating the thing over and over, it just looks cool. We like it. Human beings like order. We like pattern recognition. We'll talk about that more later. This is the introduction to patterns and the general thing of how they set atmosphere. They obviously do other things, and we'll talk about the utility of pattern. Inevitably, we'll get to, patterns of behavior and how those connect with design, and how you can, because my whole point with this class is we're learning in the visual realm, but that this connects to other more complicated things. So if you can understand how to design visual patterns, you can actually understand how to use patterns in other situations, specifically behavioral situations, such as like patterning your behavior in order to fit in, or patterning your behavior in order to stand out. There's lots of ways to think about that. So they make grids like polka dot, you could call it. So 1 swatch, 2 inches, repeated, A, same thing. That's a pattern. Then we switch it up, A, B. So 2 different swatches repeated on a checkerboard pattern. Then I like to do pinwheels. So you take one swatch, rather than repeating it, you rotate it 90 degrees, and then rotate it 90 degrees and 90 degrees, and you end up with these pinwheel effects happening. Then we mix up the swatch sizes. What if you have 3 different swatches? You do a pinwheel in the middle, and then a border of small swatches around it, and a border of small swatches around that. All of this to get into a sense of how do we explore, how do we find more in this? This is especially for folks who've had a hard time in the exploration phase of the creative process. This is a great exercise for them to like break out of that and see like, oh, I can play with this. I can have fun. I can see how like what happens, because it's very difficult to imagine the whole entire complexity of a really complex pattern before you see it. And so they can't plan it out beforehand. They just have to commit and start tracing those swatches, and suddenly it looks cool and it's unexpected. That's anyways, that's a whole nother thing of artists are so good at figuring out processes that surprise them, that they can kind of like over and over put stuff in and get surprised by what comes out. And that's what this does is here's my little grid on tracing paper. I'm going to mark a little place where I'm going to trace a swatch, boom, 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 do different things, rotate it, move it around. And it really can turn out really exciting. So we do that in class. And then here's the homework assignment that they're working on. They're going to be making 12 swatches, but they're going to add into it. Thinking about that video I shared with you guys about everything as a remix, I'm really like leaning into that. And this is where they need to remix a tradition in to what they're working on. Specifically, they have to find a culture that they do not identify with. And because the thing is every human culture that we know of that has survived, that lives in the archaeological record, they make patterns. Human beings have been doing this for God knows how long. And they've done it in interesting, unique ways, almost all towards similar ends, but almost all in different manners. And different cultures have developed different nuances of pattern based on their geographical and sociological contexts. There are places that are all very rural, nomadic tribes even, and all of that. So almost everything's coming out of textiles and tent making and things like that. You have other places like Europe where, Greece and Rome are doing this in stone. You have different styles coming out of places like Egypt, ancient Egypt. So this, but I even talk about, like punk rock. Punk rock has its own patterns. Everyone's got safety pins and patches and like different specific colors and denim, and like those are all types of patterns, and you can find patterns within that you can then use as a structure to pull off like the swatches and then build their own patterns using their insect. So this is like in Everything is a Remix, he talks about copying, mimicking, transforming, and combining. And this is one of those combined moments of take your insect, combine it with an unexpected culture, and see what kinds of patterns emerge from that. So let me share my screen again and get over to, we use Google Arts and Culture. It's a really great way, great resource. You can just first you can just start with like pattern, just search pattern and come down here and you see like the 21,218 items that they have digitally reproduced, and you can look like here's what is this? A no costume. So this is Japanese. You can see this is the seam on the shoulder, but you can see triangle patterns. So they can make triangle shaped swatches, invert them. You can either do this by color or whatnot. So they would take this, like draw a grid of triangles and then fill it with pieces of their drawing. That's one way to think about it. There are, what is this one? Tapa cloth. So the great thing, like this comes from Samoa, Polynesian island groups, Fiji, Tonga, and Samoa. You can see the different ways that they made this pattern. So it's 1, 2, 3 swatches stacked brick level, or not actually bricks, but they're offset. So 3 swatches. Inside one of the swatches, it's filled with like 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's like 4 patterns in that one little one, and then 2 big ones. That's great. That I've never seen that one. That's very interesting. I like to show them some of my favorites, specifically from like Japanese culture. I love this one. And the nice thing about, you can do this, like, man, you can get some good high quality in there. So the swatch itself is technically like, it's this shape, which I don't know if you can see that, but it's like a heron or a crane. And then it's twisted over, and then those things are mirrored. So we've got a dark bird and a dark bird. And then because of the twisting of the light bird, it makes it so that these columns seem to change. So you can actually get all of the information you need in this shape here, and then mirror it and invert it, technically. Mirror it and stagger it a little bit. So, someone could come and take like that kind of swatch and take that as a structure that they then fill with their pattern. Very interesting. I like this one. Japan had a bunch of stencils for dyeing fabric, and this is one of them. I like to point out this is the swatch. If you take like this shape, this is like the head of like an eye or something, and here's an eye. It's got little teeth, and then you rotate that around 90 degrees, and there you have that one, and then they interlock back and forth. There's one there. So they're like this crazy complex interlocking pattern that, again, you could take that as a structure, fill that in with something from the student's own drawings. So they use the culture as the structure for the swatches, and the content that fills the swatches will be from their drawings. All kinds of, cool, interesting ones. This one's from Malaysia. I just think this is like, that's just stunning. Lots to work with here. So they're going to create these interesting combination of patterns. They're using this as a resource, finding a culture that speaks a different vernacular than them, visual vernacular, and somehow combine it with their strange bug that they've been exploring. And out of that, this is where students get really surprised, because out of it emerges all kinds of really cool things that could be used in a variety of different ways. So that's our introduction to pattern, and why we're moving from focal points to these background elements. You might be able to I wonder if folks can guess what's coming next after that. What's the next level of complexity? Again, remember, this is basic design, so we're adding steps, tools to the toolbox, trying to get things to build slowly. Think about every aspect of a composition so that we can try to be as intentional and interesting, exploratory, thinking about every aspect as much as we can in a manner that they can all come together towards a whole. And the final project will coordinate all these things we've learned into one cohesive whole. Have a good weekend, everyone.